Today, ladies and gentlemen, let us bring to you the story of a fascinating investigation, recovery operation, and the findings that were eventually done in India. And the man on your screens, V Ramachandran, who was a metallurgist working for the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru, who went and was part of the recovery operations that not only recovered bodies but also major sections of the fuselage of the aircraft, which allowed not only for a reconstructive study later conducted, but also for fragments to be examined in India at the Bhabha Atomic Research Facility, which verified that indeed a mid-air explosion with a bomb in the forward cargo hold brought down Flight 182 Emperor Kanishka. Remember, the explosion took place as the flight was traversing from Montreal to London, about 190 kilometers off the coast of Ireland. It is suspected that the explosion took place at a height of 31,000 feet, which is what the last reported altitude of the aircraft was before it vanished from radar. Mr. Ramachandran is now 91 years old, but the yeoman service that he did as a scientist needs to be now recognized by a new generation. This has been part of an article that was published by the Indian Institute of Science many years ago, and the photographs have been replicated from that article. So let's have a look at a sequence of events. The wreckage, and you can see here British sailors putting together the wreckage. This is happening on the deck of their ship. Some small pieces, some large pieces. Unfortunately, there were many body bags. About 120 bodies were recovered of the 329 people on board. And the key part of the finding that Mr. Ramachandran, Professor Ramachandran, was party to was what you're seeing on your screens. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the bottom half of the aircraft fuselage. That is a stanchion, which is the rigid structure that supports the skin of the aircraft. One of the stanchions that Professor Ramachandran recovered from the sea was curled and bent, which was the first indication that this was catastrophic decompression, probably from a mid-air explosion. The aluminium tube, which is what the stanchion follows, you can see the curved structure. The aluminium tube with the stanchion follows, as I mentioned, supports the fuselage. This is a photograph that was taken of the wreckage being placed on board the cutter Kreuzturm, and it was a rather complicated exercise because a very small part of the wreckage was still floating on the surface of the sea. The vast majority of the wreckage was on the sea floor, and you can imagine the very painstaking exercise in bringing it out. Let me quote directly from the article because it will give you a perspective, a first-person account of what took place. V Ramachandran recognized the fragment from a stanchion, one of the structural elements used to support the fuselage of the aeroplane. But it didn't look like normal. The aluminium tube had fractured and curled inwards by almost a full circle. He knew then that that piece might yield clinching evidence of the fate that had befallen Emperor Kanishka, Air India's Boeing 747, on the 23rd of June 1985. He stored the piece carefully and he returned it to his quarters on the ship Kreuzturm amidst the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Ireland. To put into context of what happened, the Government of India instituted the B.N. Kirpal Inquiry Commission that came out with a report in the March of 1986. It was a 220-page report, details of which are still open to scrutiny, because the report, believe it or not, these many, almost 40 years later, is still to be made public by the Government of India, and I'm hoping that it is very readily made available in the public, or at least somebody petitions the courts to have the government release this report now. So let me put some details in. Ramachandran and others first examined the flotsam that had drifted across the ocean. Seat cushions, pieces of the overhead luggage bins, hand baggage, life vests, floor panels, but found nothing to establish why the plane fell from the sky. The rest of the wreckage was spread over an area of 15 square miles on the ocean floor, 6,700 feet deep. In it somewhere were the two black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the digital flight data recorder from the plane. To recover them, Scarab, a submersible vehicle used to lay cables on the ocean floor, was pressed into service. Operated from a French ship, Scarab was equipped with sonar, video and still cameras. It also had arms with which to handle pieces of the wreckage it came across. With it, investigators retrieved the black boxes and found their recordings were normal but stopped abruptly, as though due to a power failure. This was not enough to conclusively establish the reason for the crash. They would have to go back to the rest of the wreckage to understand what happened. This was not going to be an easy task, said Ramachandran. We were smiling at his home in Bangalore more than 3 decades later with the photographs from the time spread on the table. Let's have a look at the photograph. This is the actual device, the Scarab, that was utilized as basically the unmanned vehicle on the ocean floor to retrieve the pieces of data, pieces of the wreckage. They actually attached a 10,000-foot Kevlar cable using this device to the wreckage, and then used a 5-ton crane on another ship to retrieve them from the bottom of the ocean. Each piece of wreckage took about 25 hours between the two ships to retrieve. Look at the painstaking work that had to be done. This you can see Professor Ramachandan. He's sitting there at the bottom of his screen in the front of this boat. This is shuttling between the John Cabot, which was the other French ship, and which was the other ship, and the Kreuzturm, which were operating. This is the part of the Kanishka flow structure as it was being retrieved from the ocean. You can see the very large piece, which has, of course, the stanchions, which was suspect. This is Ramchandran, because it had already been a few days since the crash had taken place. Salt crystallization had started happening on many of the chunks of the wreckage. So this was him using a hose to clean up the salt crystals. This was the bottom skin of the front cargo hold that they recovered. And this became a crucial piece of the investigation because it showed evidence of explosive deformation and fracture. That's a clean photograph there of them recovering that bit of the wreckage. Here's another bit of the wreckage of the front top half. You can see the windows there of the 747. Let me open up this conversation as we go into the details of what actually happened. Joining us on the broadcast is Captain Shyam Kumar. Also on the broadcast is Group Captain Dr. M.A.J. Augustine Vinod on the broadcast with us as well. Captain Kumar, just look at the scenario as it existed. Air India Flight 182 en route Montreal to London has vanished without any mayday call or any notice from the pilots, from radar. Wreckage is found strewn all over the sea as flotsam, about 190 kilometers off the coast of Ireland, near the Irish city of Cork. At that point of time, no one knows what happened because the communication from the air pilots, as I mentioned, did not declare that there was an emergency, did not declare any issue. It was all normal until it suddenly vanished. Now 190 kilometers into the Atlantic Ocean, with the wreckage most of it at a depth of 6,500 feet. Imagine the task that was before the people, including the team sent by India under Professor Ramachandran. Can you explain that to our viewers, sir?
Thank you, Bishop, for inviting me to this conversation. Being a flight safety man from the naval side and a pilot, and undertaking some of the investigations of the crashes at sea, it is very, very evident that probably the air traffic controller at Sanin of Ireland has his radar screen full of 3 aircraft passing over each other at a separated height, and he was just expecting that this height will, the screen will show the 3 different aircraft soon, but suddenly later he saw only 2 aircraft, and this Kanishka had vanished from his screen. And to add to the fear, after a few minutes or hours probably, the passing by ships at the North Atlantic reported debris of aircraft floating over the ocean. And therefore, the crash was confirmed that our aircraft had crashed. Now, the evidences that is gathered during such crashes, especially at sea, it's very, very difficult operation and a challenging task for the people who are in the investigation team, as well as the people who are supporting them, the ship's crew or the underwater vessel which is going down, etc., etc. So we have just heard the story of our scientist, Mr. Ramachandran, being part of the investigation team as an assessor of the Code of Inquiry, and some more members with them. The Canadian team was doing its own investigation. But while the Indian team wanted to draw some conclusion through the evidences which we gathered through the seabed and floated or the structures, the bodies, the etc.
Yeah, so let me just delve into that, because there were 2 crucial pieces of evidences. Let me put in 3. And let me get the group captain into this conversation on that thought as well. Group Captain Vinod, now there are 3 bits of evidence. One, they got the black boxes from the ocean floor, which was almost a miracle, but they found them. In the black box recordings, as was confirmed by air traffic control, everything was normal until everything just disappeared. The data recording, the flight voice recording, it just disappeared. That means there was no mayday call. The pilots had no idea what was going on. The passengers obviously had no idea what was going on, because the pilots had not warned of anything, mayday, briefed the passengers, there's some crisis. It was traveling at a normal altitude for its point in the journey at 31,000 feet. That was the first point of evidence that something catastrophic had taken place very suddenly. The second bit of evidence, and let me read that out to you before I get your comments, and this is Mr. Ramachandran's viewpoint. At the time of recovery, and I'm quoting, observed a number of dents and impact marks on the underside of the cabin floor towards the front of the plane, suggesting shrapnel penetration. Further, the bottom skin of the front cargo compartment was severely mangled, with holes and tears at numerous places. The holes in some places were surrounded by petals and curls of the metal. The fracture edges had another feature, sharp spikes resembling the teeth of a comb, a distinct signature of explosive deformation and fracture. Further, the slopes of the edges and some of the fractured fragments reversed frequently, a feature known as reverse slant. That is also a signature of explosive fracture. Some of the sheet metal fragments indicated fracture in a plane parallel to their surface, with their sheet losing a part of its thickness. This phenomenon, called spalling, can only be caused by shock waves. This was the assessment made after the examination, and given the nature, and I'm putting the fragment of the fuselage which they recovered, the under part of the front cargo hold, which is the mangled aluminium which you're seeing on your screens, on the screen. What do you make of the assessment, and how complex a task it would have been to examine this, and what it indicates of an explosion, not just a depressurization of the plane?
Thank you for firstly inviting me, and you couldn't have probably got a better panel than Captain and I am a trained air accident investigator, done hundreds of investigations, been chief of flight safety at a big base in Gwalior, the Mirage 2000 base aeroplane you are seeing behind me. And I'm also currently the air accident investigator with the DGCA. So I'm a current air accident investigator. And like I said, you couldn't have asked for a better panel than us. Yeah. The thing which you talked about, I'll probably make it simple for our viewers to understand. Most of them are not connected with aviation. There is something called an explosion, then there's something called an implosion. An aeroplane, which is a pressurized vessel flying thousands of feet above the sea, and this happened at 31,000 feet, mind you. At 31,000 feet, even a very small explosion is enough. And this perpetrator of this entire thing, Mr. Rayat, he obtained these explosions, the C4s, and he had sort of done an overkill. And when something explodes, like I'm holding my hand, when an explosion happens, what you said, the curl happens, the metal opens outwards, and that is what a scientist found. And when the metal opens outwards, metal cuts into, so there is metal and the wiring is going in between. The metal cuts into the wires that goes into such a huge aeroplane, and these aeroplanes are flown with the help of electricity generated by multiple generators and hydraulic lines going all over. So in the moment metal curls outwards, it cuts everything. It's like, it cutting your jugular vein, and you will have an instant death. So that is exactly what has happened. But what I really want to bring to fore was something that you covered in the passing, and you hoped that it will be one day shown to us as to what happened really. And that is something which from the open domain I can talk about, is the involvement of CSIS. This fellow, the perpetrator who confessed to his crime, was released by the current government, and he walked free after having killed 268 Canadians. There were only 24 Indians in it. Yeah. 268 Canadians perished in this whole thing, and he walked free. And he walked free because CSIS was involved. And it is there for us to read. The CSIS is like an equivalent of a CIA.
Yeah, so I just came out of a telecast because the Canadian Commission of Inquiry under Justice John Major was conducted. And I just came out of a telecast. We're doing a several part series, of which this formulates one part on the damning findings it says ununderstandable things. Remember Stephen Harper, the former Canadian Prime Minister, came and apologized for the bungling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but one can suppose that it was more than bungling.
Destruction of evidence, and including extrajudicial killing that they are crying hoarse about, happened on the very soil of Canada, to say the Khalistanis.
Yeah.
So the whole thing has been a slap on the face on the Canadians rather than on Indians.
Okay. So let me bring it back to the point of issue. So we've mentioned the black box. So the first point, when the aircraft disappears, we don't know what's happened, because the pilots have not reported any anomaly. They have not given a mayday call. There's not even a oops or something strange which has come out. It's simply just vanished from midair. It's dropped off the radar. The second point is a point of fortune, that you found the black boxes under the sea. And the black box don't tell you anything, because they just abruptly end. There's a power failure, abruptly finished. Then, of course, is the wreckage, which we were discussing here. Yeah, and maybe you want to make an interjection, go ahead, sir, then I want to make one more point.
Yeah, there is one more piece of evidence, which was, I would say, providence, which was another bomb which didn't go into the aeroplane and it exploded in Japan.
I have a photograph.
That-
I have a photograph of that as well. This was in Narita. It killed 2 baggage handlers on the airport because they mistimed the bomb time delay. So I want to now put in a third part, which was part of the conclusion that was drawn. And thank God Indian scientists were working on it, because if it had been left to the Canadians, gosh knows what they would have concluded. They must have said that was, the engine blew up. Who knows what could have happened. But this was the conclusion, and I want to read this out. And Captain, for your thoughts on this. Of the 329 victims, bodies of only 131 were found. Some of them had their clothes ripped off. From the post-mortem examination, which revealed flail injuries, it became evident that they had fallen from a great height. The plane must have disintegrated in mid-air and suffered a rapid decompression, for some of them had their eardrums ruptured. Some of the victims showed signs of hypoxia, exposed as they were to the thin atmosphere, lacking oxygen. 3 appeared to have survived the free fall from 31,000 feet, only then to die due to drowning in the ocean. Captain, just to revive in a new generation of people that you're on board the first 747 that Air India ever bought. You're flying from Montreal to London. You're almost reached your destination. You're just a couple of hours out. Everything's normal. It's cruising altitude. Some people are probably sleeping. Some people are probably eating something. Some people are probably chatting. And a bomb blast causes an explosive decompression. It is unbelievable, sir, that the postmortem found that 3 people survived a fall of 31,000 feet. I mean, one can't imagine. I remember the sight, sir, of the people jumping off the towers in 9/11 because they had no other recourse. And those horrible visuals that are, ingrained in our minds. Just imagine the last few moments, how impossible they must have been, sir.
Yes, few points comes very clear in this, which you have just narrated. The evidences which was gathered through the human medical or pathological examination and the regions which you have just said, it was very clear that there was a explosion. The people touched the water in free fall, died because of drowning or hypoxia or all these regions which you have just said, which I did not to say. And there was a clear indication that there was an explosion in which the aircraft split mid-air. This is also corroborated by the fact that the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder both went off at the same time. That means there was a sudden power failure, but there was an emergency battery. The pilots did not give any mayday call. Therefore, again, it comes to the point that it was a sudden rupture. That means it is very clear to us, to everyone, that there was an explosion. There was another spare engine being carried on the aircraft to be brought back to India for repair or for the other purposes, for maintenance. Now, the radar indicator also indicated that this did not have any problem and the aircraft was in a balanced flight and the engines did not explode. The scientific examination by the Indian scientists at National Aerospace Laboratory, at Naval Chemical and Meteorological Laboratory, NCML at Mumbai, and all other evidences pointed out very clearly that there was a sudden blast in the forward cargo compartment which resulted in explosion of this.
Okay, so we are going to have to recreate and have supposition here. So, Captain, I'm assuming that there would have been some people who would have been killed immediately due to the blast itself. The people who were sitting in the front half, perhaps even in the cockpit. Remember, the 747 in those eras had, the front half had 2 stories. So the front cargo hold is where the bomb is blown up. You're flying at, I'm assuming what, sir, about what are your ground speed, at what would be what? Wing Commander, Group Captain, what would the ground speed be at that point of time, or what would the airspeed be at that point of time?
The two things. One is ground speed, one is airspeed.
Yeah.
Airspeed would be about 260 knots, that's about 500 kmph an hour, kmph. And ground speed would be approximately 800 kilometers per hour.
So you're looking, so you're looking at very rapid disintegration. This is not happening over seconds and minutes. It is almost instantaneous. It's literally ripping itself to shreds after the explosion.
And like I said, he had taken an overkill on explosives. He wanted to cut off a trunk of a tree. If you remember, that is how he went around shopping for this explosives, and he took 4 times that amount. Mr. Rayat took 4 times that amount. But another quick point, whenever you permit, I would like to make.
Yeah, okay. So I just want you to comment now on the post-mortem analysis, because again, we have to picture the last few moments.
Yeah, see,
it's difficult to imagine. So I'm assuming, sir, there would have been a set of people who were killed instantaneously in the explosion. Then there are a set of people who clearly have suffered hypoxia, which means that they are trying to breathe in an oxygen-sparse environment. Which means that a few seconds they've not been killed because of the explosion. They've been killed because they basically choked, lack of oxygen. Then there are a bunch of people, of course, whose eardrums have exploded, which means eardrums have burst, which means that this has happened at a very high speed, which is, of course, which is why your ear pops even though you have a pressurized cabin. Can you just explain this to our viewers, please?
So the whole thing is worked around number of bodies that were recovered, which was less than half. So now in the number of bodies, we found out that 3 people lost their lives due to drowning. Actually, eardrum popping or eardrum breakage doesn't lead to death.
Yeah.
What leads to death is injuries. Even hypoxia at 31,000 feet when you're doing a free fall, even hypoxia doesn't kill you instantaneously. It kills you in about a minute or 2. Before that, you will probably be hitting your terminal velocity and hitting the water. So eventually, everyone has either died due to injuries that was caused due to explosion, or hitting the water and breaking up into smithereens, because water at a very high speed is worse than even a ground. If you hit water at that high speed, you will be blown into pieces. But some of them who probably entered the water vertically, that is head down or leg down, are the ones who perished due to drowning.
So the post-mortem is telling us, and the post-mortem is basically giving you cause of death.
Cause of death.
And if the cause of death is not body trauma, which means it's not an impact related, that you've hit the sea floor, which is why you've died because of blunt force trauma, it means you were alive at the point
of impacting
impact enough that it took then maybe a few seconds or a few minutes afterwards for you to drown. Because I'm assuming after a fall without a parachute on 31,000 feet, you're anyway stunned. You might be alive, but you're obviously knocked unconscious at the very least. And there's absolutely zero chance. Forget miracle, there's zero chance, because water, of course, at that speed is not only like concrete. You might get lucky, but you've drowned. So we can't scarce imagine. I'm sure you've had colleagues, Group Captain, who've done the parachute training and all that, and it stays probably in the back of your mind that what happens if the parachute never opens and you're in a free fall, which only ends one way. You've had several seconds, if not tens of seconds, of sheer abject terror.
I'm a paratrooper myself, and I've done the paratrooping course from the PTS, the paratroop training school in Agra, and I did it with NSG. And in my stick, I had one Jawan whose parachute didn't open, and I was the leader of the stick. I jumped first, and he was the 6th to jump behind me, and he perished. And it was part of training. Another good thing, I said I want to make one point. Another good thing that came out of this particular accident was Bureau of Civil Aviation Security was formed, BCAS. Initially, it formed under DGCA, but later on it became a separate entity Kripal Commission was the one who said we need to have, because Article 17 of ICAO article was revisited. Unlawful violence in airport became international violence and baggage. Today, you can't get into an aeroplane and you can't get out of an aeroplane and your baggage cannot fly off. Your baggage has to be taken out. All this happened post Kanishka. So Kanishka couldn't be repeated.
Okay, so for people, for
yeah.
people watching this broadcast, believe it or not, there was a baggage handler representing Canadian Pacific Air in Vancouver who actually allowed an individual identified as Mr. Singh to book his baggage on the connecting Air India flight. Remember, the bomb was actually loaded on a flight before this, and it was carried on to the flight from Toronto, even though he did not have a confirmed reservation on board that flight.
No, those days you didn't require one, because there were cases those days, I mean, people who traveled those days, you can ask them, that you would end up somewhere, your baggage will end up somewhere else. It used to happen those days, but today it cannot happen because you have to reconcile, the baggage has to be reconciled to the person. And the baggage handler was not the issue there. The lady at the gate, she through-booked this particular Riyadh fellow without having a confirmed ticket. And he browbeat her is the way through, because ICAO didn't mandate you that you should be present in the plane while your baggage is in the plane. Pre-Kanishka. It all happened post-Kanishka.
Okay, so I know it's a bit macabre and by definition deeply disturbing. This conversation is intended to be deeply disturbing. I want you to think about children, men, women sitting on board their aircraft for a minute, and in a split second, because of 4 masterminds sitting in Canada, their lives were extinguished. Captain Shyam Kumar, now, it's a multi-100-page, 5-volume commission report, and we've been going it through one by one. We've done now 3 half-an-hour presentations of what the commissions of inquiry that the Canadians found. India conducted a commission of inquiry, sir, as I mentioned, under Justice B.N. Kripal, who then, of course, was the future Chief Justice of India as well. Why are we holding on to this, sir? We knew what happened. We saw the farcical trial that took place in Canada, in which everybody was acquitted, and even Riyadh, who was the bomb maker, was only pled guilty to manslaughter, forget terrorism and other worse charges. He was out on bail in 2008. The conviction happened in 2005, by the way. 1985 was when the attack took place. 2005 is when the conviction took place, all credit to the Canadian judicial system. They released him on bail in 2008, the bomb maker, and he was put in a halfway house, and as Group Captain was mentioning, about 5-6 years ago, he was even released from there. He's a free man walking around in Canada. How is that okay?
The Indian investigations was very specific about bringing out the explosion, because all these things which we are talking now is we are saying that there was a explosion.
Correct.
Now there was explosion. Now how the explosion took place? So this was by material evidences. It was proved by Indian scientists that it was an explosion, and with the circumstantial evidence of luggage booked in Japan for Vancouver for this connecting flight, this was a circumstantial evidence. So in the legal parlance, these issues have to be put in 2 and 2 together. However, the inquiry went on for 20 years, and the Indian government and Canadian government was onto the job. As we know, we lost the worst Air India, the crash in this, probably before 9/11. This was the worst aviation crash of the world.
Yes.
So it was very, very important for the people to carry out an investigation, because it was a transaction over the ocean between the countries. 5 countries were involved in it. So many people were involved in it actually. Most of the crew were British citizens, Canadian citizens, Indian citizens. People went to the sea and just, they had not even they didn't have any bodies to even do the last rituals. So it was a very important aspect.
Okay. Captain, the Justice Kirpal report came out in the March of 1986. We are in currently the September of 2023. Has the time come that the report should be released? We should know at least what the Indian investigators found. We only have a couple of interviews and articles that seem to indicate what was found. But should we now come out with the report? Captain? Captain Kumar?
We need to come. Okay,
yes.
Captain Kumar.
Yes, you see this after the thing, Mr. Rayad was given, he pleaded guilty and he was in the jail. Later in 2017, he has been released, but other two were actually acquitted. They were not given any punishment, although it became very clear that it was an explosion and he has actually made the bomb. So he pleaded guilty, therefore he was convicted. But
yeah,
now
he pled guilty and followed a sentencing of 15 years.
15 years, yes.
Yeah, and having already served time, he was released within 3 years of the conviction. And as I mentioned, as we speak right now, he's roaming around in Canada. He's the man who made the bomb.
Yes, he's roaming around in Canada. But yes, now that we are discussing about certain other issues at Canada, we are discussing about current issues that is happening, the action which has happened in Canada and between our government in the recent years. We must look at this past. We must look at these aspects, and we must be very clear and authentic about what happened. We also have the failure of the luggage without person. We also had the failure of this scan at the airport.
No, sir. I promise you, I'll try to forward you a copy of the report. You won't believe it, sir, but Canadian intelligence officers, and we covered this about 48 hours ago. I'll get a link forwarded of that telecast. Canadian intelligence officers, as per their own inquiry, were following Parmar and Rayat while they were conducting test explosions exactly 2 weeks before the Kanishka bombing in the woods in British Columbia, and they did nothing. It's laughable. I just concluded a telecast that on June 1st, which is 23 days before the attack, intelligence advisory was issued by Air India headquarters in Mumbai that there will be an attempt to place time delay bomb devices on Air India aircraft. And the investigators and the prosecutors for 30 years pretended they weren't even aware that this telex existed until it came out in the Inquiry Commission report. So let me quickly get a last thought before we wind up. I'm already out of time. Group Captain Augustine, number one, should we now, as India, we can't control the Canadians because they're up to whatever they're up to. They bungled the investigation or covered it up, whatever choice terminology we can use. But should we at least release our report, the Kirpal report?
No, if you ask me, Kirpal report is the ace up the sleeve that we have currently. And we should use it judiciously. And I think when time comes, we will probably use it. But what is a couple of quick points from what you covered? RAW had issued this advisory or a thing saying that they are likely to be, time delay bombs. The funny part, Rayat was released for mere some $1,000 or $2,000. He moved his entire family to UK, and he worked in a Jaguar factory for 2 years while this entire thing was going on, and extradited back. And then he served his sentence, which was partly served, and he walks clean. Ajab Singh Bagri, nothing happened. That Ripudaman Singh Malik, nothing happened. Surjan Singh Gill, nothing happened. So many extrajudicial killing happened. All this extrajudicial killing and bungling of tampering with evidence by CSIS, involvement of CSIS, I am sure all this is there in our Indian report, which is why probably it has not been declassified, because it will be a big embarrassment for Canada, big embarrassment for Trudeau, and big embarrassment for everybody.
But maybe it should. 220-page report released, I think it was the first week of March 1986, so in quick time. We didn't take 30 years like the Canadians took. and it was on the basis of first-hand evidence recovery and Indians who were party to that investigation, because I genuinely fear that had this team under Professor Ramachandran not gone, maybe, just maybe, under a very dubious investigation by the Canadians, who knows, they could have even concluded it wasn't a bomb. They could have made any sort of claim could have happened. And they, of course, failed to convict anyone and punish anyone for this effectively. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Captain, do you want to make a quick last point?
Quick last point is, if we had
let the group captain go first. Captain, I'm coming to you. I'll leave the last word with you. Group captain, go ahead.
Yeah, if our scientists had not gone, we would have not come to know it was an explosion. BCAS wouldn't have been formed. In all this, Article 17 wouldn't have been revisited. Another Air India Flight 182 would have happened.
Okay.
You know, we prevented so many accidents in the world thanks to our
Captain Kumar, quick last thought.
We must understand, we had apart from the Canadian, we had the French ship, we had the French people, we had the British people around, and then the Indian scientists were on board. There was definitely many other minds working in it. And we carried out investigation at our level. When these wreckages are being recovered from the ocean, there was other people who were around. The National Transportation Safety Board sent a team to address this in conjunction with the Canadians. So here we are. Bottom line.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.